He was a billionaire who thought emotions were useless and money could fix anything, especially when it came to his sick son. After all, he had paid for the best doctors, the best treatments, and the most advanced equipment. But nothing seemed to work. His son only grew weaker, quieter, and more distant. Then one night, without warning, he walked into his own mansion and saw something he never expected. His longtime maid, standing in front of the mirror, clippers in hand, doing something no one had asked her to do. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She was just there for the boy in a way no one else had been. What the billionaire did next, no one saw coming. Before we continue with this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video. Oh, and don't forget to comment below where you're watching us from. We love to know that. Liam was only 7 years old when everything in his life changed. After being diagnosed with a rare and aggressive type of cancer, his entire world was reduced to a quiet, isolated wing of his father's massive mansion. The house was enormous, filled with expensive furniture, shiny marble floors, and high ceilings, but none of that mattered to Liam. What used to be a place to play and run around turned into a space of silence and sadness. Doctors and nurses came and went, checking machines and giving him medicine. His room had everything a child could want: toys, games, and even a big TV. But Liam didn't use any of it. He mostly stayed in bed, tired and weak from the illness. He didn't laugh, didn't ask questions, and didn't speak. The house was full of life and movement, but Liam was completely alone in his corner of it, lost in a world that no one seemed to reach. His mother had died the day he was born, and since then, Liam had lived with only his father, Oliver Sinclair. Oliver was one of the richest men in the country, always busy with his companies and never home for long. He thought giving Liam the best doctors, a private wing in the mansion, and the most advanced equipment was enough. But he never realized that what Liam needed most was something money couldn't provide. Liam needed someone to hold his hand when he was scared, to sit with him during treatments, and to read him a bedtime story. Instead, Oliver sent updates from his office, told the doctors to spare no expense, and believed that his wealth could fix everything. He wasn't cruel, just disconnected. He didn't see the pain in Liam's eyes, the growing silence, or the fact that his son was slowly giving up. Oliver thought he was helping, but in truth, he was drifting further and further away. As the treatment continued, the side effects became more noticeable. Liam's hair began to fall out, and he started to look different, paler, thinner, and weaker. He stopped eating, not because the food was bad, but because he didn't have the energy or the desire anymore. He barely slept, waking up often in the middle of the night from pain or fear. At first, he had cried, but eventually even that stopped. The nurses tried to cheer him up with silly jokes and stories, but Liam would just stare at the ceiling. The silence around him grew heavier each day. Doctors began to speak about switching from treatment to palliative care. It was their way of saying they didn't believe the medicine would help much longer. For a child, 7 years old, to be given up on like that, it was heartbreaking. But no one seemed to know how to change things. Everyone focused on his body, but forgot about his heart. Despite all of this, the mansion went on as usual. Staff cleaned the halls, cooks prepared fancy meals, and Oliver's office received calls from all over the world. To them, Liam was just a child in a room, a patient being taken care of. But inside that room, something had changed. Liam didn't cry or scream anymore. He barely moved. The boy who once ran through those halls, playing with toy cars and asking about the stars, was now silent and still. Oliver, in his own way, believed he was doing everything he could. He approved medical procedures, donated to research, and told everyone he would never stop fighting for his son. But the truth was, he wasn't really there. Not in the way Liam needed. Liam didn't want another pill or another machine. He wanted someone to sit beside him and talk to him like he mattered, not like a medical case, but like a little boy who was scared and alone. What nobody seemed to understand was that Liam's silence wasn't just because of the illness. It was because he had lost hope. He had stopped believing that anyone would come and make things better. He had already lost his mother before even knowing her, and now he felt like he was slowly losing himself. The room was full of quiet beeping machines, soft lights, and the occasional nurse's footsteps, but no laughter, no voices calling his name. He looked out the window sometimes, watching the sky change, the sun rise and fall, but he didn't speak. Even when someone asked him questions, he would just nod or shake his head. Words felt too heavy. He felt invisible, like a shadow in the mansion. His silence was his way of saying that he was tired. Tired of being alone, tired of fighting, and tired of pretending that he was okay when he clearly wasn't. But in the middle of all this, there was one person who noticed. One person who didn't walk past his room with pity or avoid his eyes. This person didn't bring new medicine or charts. They brought something else. Presence. They sat by Liam's bed without trying to fix anything. They didn't ask him to talk or smile. They just stayed, quietly, maybe reading a book or humming a soft tune. Slowly, without even realizing it, Liam started to feel something different. It wasn't a full return of hope, but a small flicker. Someone had finally seen him, not as a patient, not as a problem to be solved, but as a boy who needed love, company, and comfort. That simple presence, that quiet attention, began to break through the thick wall of silence that had grown around Liam. And even though he didn't speak yet, something inside him began to listen again. Amara had worked in the Sinclair mansion long before Liam was born. She had started as a housemaid, but over the years, she had become much more than that. When Liam came into the world, just minutes after his mother left it, Amara was the first to hold him in her arms. From that moment on, she became the person who took care of him every day. She gave him his baths, told him bedtime stories, and sang to him when he couldn't sleep. She was the one who knew exactly how much milk he liked in his cereal and which blanket he needed when he was scared. She never missed a moment in his life, even when Oliver was away on business for weeks. Amara was always there. She became his comfort, his constant. Over time, Liam naturally began calling her Mommy without anyone correcting him. To Liam, she was the only mother figure he had ever known. Amara never tried to replace Liam's mother, but her heart filled with love every time he looked at her with trust. Years ago, Amara had lost her own baby. It had been the hardest moment of her life, and a part of her had never healed. But taking care of Liam gave her a new purpose. She didn't just care for him because it was her job. She loved him like he was her own child. Whenever he got sick, she stayed up through the night, wiping his forehead and whispering that everything would be okay. She learned how to help with his medication, how to calm his panic attacks, and how to comfort him when the pain was too much. The doctors and nurses rotated shifts, but Amara was always there. She didn't leave when her shift ended. She didn't take days off. She stayed because she couldn't imagine being anywhere else while Liam suffered. Every time Liam had a chemotherapy session, Amara held his hand. He hated the needles, the machines, and the cold hospital smell. But her hand gave him something to hold on to. She whispered to him, told him stories, or just sat in silence if that's what he needed. After each session, when Liam felt sick and tired, she would carry him to his bed, gently change his clothes, and rub his back until he fell asleep. When he woke up in the middle of the night crying, she came running, no matter how exhausted she was. She brushed his hair, sang lullabies, and told him that he was strong, even if he didn't believe it. Amara didn't expect anything in return. She only wanted Liam to feel safe and loved. She noticed the small changes in him, when he began to withdraw more, when he stopped smiling, when his energy faded day by day. She watched, heartbroken, as he slowly stopped being the curious, happy boy she had raised. Then came the day everything changed. Liam looked at himself in the mirror after one of his treatments. His hair, which had once been thick and soft, had started falling out in clumps. His face looked thinner, his eyes darker, and his skin pale. He stared at his reflection for a long time, confused at first, then scared. When he reached up and touched his head, a few more strands came loose. That's when he broke down. He cried harder than Amara had ever seen. He didn't scream or shout. He just cried with deep, painful sobs that shook his entire body. Amara rushed to him, wrapping her arms around him tightly. She didn't say anything at first. She let him cry, holding him close, rocking him gently the way she used to when he was a toddler. She felt every bit of his pain as if it were her own. In that moment, she realized he wasn't just sick. He was heartbroken. Amara knew something had to be done. She couldn't fix his illness, and she couldn't take the pain away, but she also couldn't sit by and do nothing. Watching him cry like that, feeling so small and helpless, was too much. She sat awake that night, thinking. She looked at photos of him before the illness, smiling and full of life. She remembered how he used to pretend to be a superhero, how he loved building tall Lego towers, and how he would laugh when she made animal sounds during story time. That boy was still there, somewhere inside, and she wasn't going to let him disappear. Amara decided that from now on, her job was not just to take care of Liam's physical needs, but to fight for his spirit too. She would find a way to bring back his smile, even if just for a moment. He had given up on hope, but she hadn't. The next morning, Amara entered Liam's room with a quiet determination. She sat beside him, holding his hand like always, but her mind was already working on what she needed to do next. She didn't know exactly how, but she would find a way to remind him of who he was before all the pain. Maybe it would be a small thing, like drawing together or watching his favorite cartoons. Maybe it would be something bigger. But Amara was sure of one thing. She wouldn't let Liam go through this alone. She had lost her child once, and she wouldn't lose another. Liam was family. She was his mother in every way that mattered. And as she watched him lie there, eyes empty and shoulders still shaking from the night before, she promised herself she would do whatever it took. Liam needed something no doctor could provide. Amara knew what it was. And she knew it had to come from her. That morning, Amara helped Liam out of bed and guided him slowly toward the bathroom. His steps were small and weak, and he leaned on her for support. It was a part of their daily routine. Brush teeth, wash face, try to eat something, but every step had become harder lately. When they reached the sink, Amara gently handed Liam his toothbrush and squeezed out the toothpaste like she always did. But when she pointed toward the mirror, asking him to look up and rinse, he froze. Liam kept his head down, avoiding his reflection. She waited patiently, encouraging him softly, but he refused. "I don't want to look," he whispered. After a few minutes, he finally raised his eyes to the mirror. His face was pale, his eyes looked tired, and his hair was almost all gone, leaving uneven patches across his scalp. His lips began to tremble, and then, in a shaky voice, he asked, "Why am I the only one who looks ugly, Mommy?" Her heart sank. She had been preparing herself for moments like these, but nothing could truly get her ready for that question. Liam wasn't just reacting to the physical changes, he was starting to believe something was wrong with who he was. She knelt beside him, wiped the quiet tears that rolled down his cheeks, and hugged him tight. "You're not ugly," she whispered, her voice breaking. But Liam didn't believe her. He didn't speak again. He rinsed his mouth, turned away from the mirror, and asked to go back to bed. Amara tucked him in, brushed the small pieces of fallen hair off his pillow, and sat quietly next to him until he fell asleep. Her thoughts raced. She kept replaying his question in her mind, over and over. It wasn't fair. He was just a child. No child should feel ashamed of something he couldn't control. She knew she had to act. That night, long after everyone in the house had gone to sleep, Amara stood in front of her own bathroom mirror. She had tied her hair up in a bun like she always did. Her hands were shaking. She stared at her reflection, unsure for a moment, then slowly picked up the electric hair clippers. She plugged them in without a sound. The quiet buzz filled the room, but it felt loud in her ears. Her fingers trembled as she raised the clippers to her head. She took a deep breath, closed her eyes for a second, and made the first cut. A small chunk of her black hair fell into the sink. She hesitated, crying quietly, but kept going. Piece by piece, she shaved her head, not because it was easy, and not because she wanted to. She did it for Liam, so he wouldn't feel alone, so he would understand that hair didn't define who he was. She kept cutting until nothing was left. Liam woke up during the night and, not seeing Amara in the room, slowly got out of bed and walked down the hallway. The house was quiet. He reached the doorway of the bathroom and stopped. Inside, he saw Amara standing in front of the mirror, hair all gone, holding the buzzing machine with both hands. She hadn't noticed him yet. Her eyes were red, and her face was wet with tears. Liam didn't understand at first. He tilted his head, confused. "Mommy!" he called out, his voice soft. Amara turned around slowly. She wiped her tears and smiled, even though her heart was still heavy. Liam stepped closer, looking at her head, then at the pile of hair in the sink. He stayed quiet for a few seconds. Then with a small voice he asked, "Why did you do that?" Amara knelt down, held his little hands in hers and said, "If you don't have hair, then I don't want mine either. We're together in this." He looked at her closely, trying to understand. His face was still sad, still tired, but something had changed. He wasn't crying anymore. He touched her head gently and let out a short breath. Then he looked at his own reflection again. For the first time, he didn't turn away. He didn't smile, but he didn't cry either. Amara pulled him into a hug and he leaned into her. They stayed like that, sitting on the bathroom floor, surrounded by silence and fallen hair. Liam didn't say much, but his eyes were different now, less full of shame and more full of questions. He had been feeling so alone in his pain, but now someone had done something big just to stand with him. It wasn't just about hair, it was about being seen, understood, and loved. That moment between them changed something deep inside both of them, even if they didn't have words for it yet. Then, without warning, the quiet in the hallway broke. The door creaked open slowly. Amara and Liam turned to look. It was Oliver. He had returned from a late business meeting and noticed the light coming from the bathroom. He hadn't planned on checking in, but something drew him there. And now he stood in the doorway, completely still, staring at what was in front of him. His son, sick and weak, sitting on the floor next to a woman with a freshly shaved head, her arms wrapped around him. The buzzing machine still in her lap, her face still wet from crying. Oliver didn't speak. He couldn't. He just stared, his mouth slightly open, eyes wide. He had never seen a moment like this in his house. He had never seen Amara look like that, and he had never truly looked at Liam this way before, not just as a sick child, but as a little boy who needed someone beside him. Oliver stayed frozen in place, unsure of what to say or do. A part of him felt like he didn't belong in that moment, like he had walked into something far more real than anything he was used to. He looked at Liam and saw how his son leaned on Amara, trusting her completely. Then he looked at Amara, her head bare, her face calm but tired. The meaning of the scene slowly sank in. This wasn't just a woman doing her job. This was someone who had given her whole heart to a boy who needed it. Oliver felt something stir inside him, guilt, confusion, maybe even regret. For the first time, he saw the distance between him and his son, and how much space Amara had filled without ever asking for anything. He didn't say a word. He just stood there, silent and overwhelmed, while Liam looked back at him with quiet eyes. The scene had changed something, and Oliver knew he couldn't ignore it anymore. Oliver had never been good with emotions. Since he was a child, he was taught that feelings were distractions, unnecessary things that got in the way of decisions. His father, a cold and serious businessman, used to say, "Feelings are for the weak. Control them, or they'll control you." Oliver followed that rule all his life. He learned how to hide his sadness, push away guilt, and ignore fear. Success was what mattered: numbers, deals, and results. That's how he became one of the richest men in the country. But this mindset also made him distant. He didn't know how to comfort someone, didn't know what to say when someone cried. When his wife died giving birth to Liam, he told himself to focus on work and provide the best life possible for his son. That way, maybe he wouldn't have to feel the pain. Maybe money and structure could replace the chaos of emotions he didn't understand. But when Oliver stood in the bathroom doorway and saw Amara shaving her head for Liam, something shifted. He froze, not because of the act itself, but because of what it meant. He had never seen someone give so much of themselves for someone else without expecting anything in return. Amara didn't do it for praise. She didn't do it for a photo or a thank you. She did it because Liam needed it. In that moment, Oliver felt something break inside him, something he had kept locked away for a long time. He saw Liam's tired face, the way the boy looked at Amara with love and trust, and he realized he had never earned that kind of look from his own son. Shame hit him like a wave. Without a word, he turned around and left. He didn't know how to stay. That night, for the first time in years, Oliver didn't go to bed. He stayed up, lost in thoughts he had been avoiding for far too long. Alone in his study, Oliver opened his laptop and searched through old folders he hadn't touched in years. He found home videos, short clips of Liam as a baby. There was one of him crawling, another of him laughing in a high chair, and one where he took his first steps. Oliver watched each one carefully. He saw how Amara was always in the background, holding Liam's hands, cheering him on, wiping his face. Then he opened photo albums, ones he hadn't looked at since his wife passed. Her smile stared back at him from the pages. In one picture, she was pregnant, holding her belly and smiling wide. In another, she held baby Liam in her arms, tired but happy. Oliver hadn't cried at her funeral. He told himself he needed to be strong. But now, sitting there surrounded by memories, tears finally came. Quiet tears. Not loud or dramatic, just slow, steady drops for everything he had ignored for too long. As the sun started to rise, Oliver sat in front of the mirror in his private bathroom. He stared at his reflection. His face looked tired, older than he remembered. He still wore his suit from the day before. Slowly, he reached for the electric clippers. He turned them on and stared at them for a moment. Then, without hesitation, he started shaving his head. He had never done anything like this before. Not for a deal, not for a campaign, not even for himself. This wasn't about appearances or control. It was about connection. When he finished, he looked at himself again. The man in the mirror looked different, not just because of the shaved head, but because of the decision behind it. Oliver didn't expect it to fix everything. He didn't expect forgiveness. But he wanted to take a step, even a small one, toward the boy who had lost so much, and the woman who had done more for him than anyone else ever had. Later that morning, while Amara helped Liam get dressed, Oliver walked into the room without saying a word. Liam looked up, expecting the usual, his father in a rush, checking emails, giving quick updates about the doctors. But this time was different. Liam's eyes widened as he saw Oliver's bald head. For a moment, he didn't react. Then, out of nowhere, Liam burst out laughing. It wasn't a forced laugh. It was real, loud, clear, and full of surprise. "You look funny, Daddy," he said, still giggling. Oliver stood there unsure of what to say, but a small smile appeared on his face. Amara watched from behind, stunned. She had never seen Liam laugh like that since the illness began. Oliver walked over and gently ruffled Liam's head. "I figured we could match," he said awkwardly. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Liam's laughter faded into a smile, and for the first time in a long time, there was warmth in the room again. That laugh, as small as it seemed, marked the beginning of something new. For Liam, it was the first time he had felt joy since the treatments began. For Amara, it was a moment of relief, like a tiny light finally shining through the darkness. And for Oliver, it was a sign that maybe he could change. He didn't suddenly become a perfect father overnight. He still struggled to say the right things, still felt awkward with hugs and emotions. But he started showing up. He sat with Liam during treatments, even if he didn't know what to say. He helped Amara with meals. He began asking questions, not to control, but to understand. Little by little, he allowed himself to feel, to care without fear. And it all began because of one selfless act of love, one quiet gesture from a woman who had nothing to prove and everything to give. That moment in the bathroom broke him open and started to rebuild him into something better. From that day on, Oliver was no longer just the man in the background. He didn't stay locked in his office, and he didn't send others to do what he should have been doing himself. Instead, he showed up. He began joining Amara in Liam's daily care, not as a stranger trying to help, but as a father finally taking responsibility. Every time Liam had a chemotherapy session, Oliver was there. On time, quiet, but present. He would sit next to the hospital bed, holding Liam's hand, sometimes reading from a book, even if Liam was too tired to listen. He brought dinosaur books, picture cards, and silly stories that made Liam smile. Amara showed him how to help with the feeding tube, how to adjust the pillows just right, and how to keep track of the medications. Oliver didn't know all the right things to say, but for once, he wasn't hiding. He was trying. He was learning to be there. At home, Oliver's changes became even more visible. He started waking up early to help make breakfast. The first time he tried to make pancakes with Amara, he burned 3 and dropped a 4th on the floor. Liam laughed so hard he had to stop eating. Oliver didn't care that he wasn't good at it. He kept trying. Every little mistake became a new moment of connection. He learned that Liam loved dinosaurs more than anything else and had memorized dozens of names. They spent hours together watching documentaries, drawing dinosaur scenes, and pretending to be different species. Oliver discovered Liam hated the dark and always needed a small nightlight to sleep peacefully. He also learned that Liam loved to hear stories about his mother, stories that Amara had kept in her heart all these years. She began sharing them slowly at first, then more openly, giving Oliver pieces of the woman he had lost and the boy who still needed to know her. The mansion, which had once felt cold and formal, began to feel more like a real home. Liam's bedroom, once quiet and empty, now had drawings taped to the walls, toys scattered across the floor, and pillows arranged into little forts. Oliver and Amara placed a bookshelf near his bed, filled with his favorite books. They added a small lamp with dinosaur shapes that cast soft lights on the ceiling. Every evening they all sat together, sometimes talking, sometimes just watching Liam sleep. There was laughter in the house again. Soft, unsure at first, but growing louder each day. The nurses noticed the difference too. Liam, though still sick, seemed lighter when his father was around. He didn't talk much, but he smiled more often, and he started asking for Oliver during painful moments. Love, which had been missing for so long, was finally present. It didn't heal everything, but it gave them something they hadn't had in a long time: hope. But as they held on to that hope, reality kept pressing in. Liam's condition wasn't improving fast enough. The treatments were no longer enough on their own. His body was fighting, but it was getting weaker. The doctors explained the situation with calm but serious voices. Liam needed a bone marrow transplant. The only way to have a real chance at survival was to find a donor who was a perfect match, 100% compatible. Without it, he wouldn't make it through the next stages. Amara and Oliver sat in silence as the words sank in. They had done everything possible up to this point, but now they were facing something they couldn't control. The hospital had already checked the donor banks, and so far, no match had been found. Time was running out, and the doctors warned that every passing week made things more dangerous. What had once felt like a steady routine now became a race against something invisible, but very real. Oliver, who had just started to rebuild his relationship with Liam, now faced the fear of losing him. He couldn't stop thinking about how late he had been to step in and how little time might be left. He asked every specialist he could find. He offered donations, met with private labs, and contacted international donor registries. Nothing was off the table. Amara helped organize testing events and reached out to community centers. They both got tested again, hoping something had been missed. Everyone in the staff, every relative, every friend, they all got tested too. But the chances of a perfect match were small. Oliver began making phone calls at all hours, looking for experimental programs or new research. He wasn't trying to fix it with money anymore. He was desperate, and for the first time, his heart was fully in the fight. Liam noticed the worry on their faces, but he didn't ask questions. He just held their hands and waited. The days passed, and tension grew. The once joyful evenings were now filled with quiet talks and longer hugs. Liam, though he didn't fully understand the medical terms, could feel the change. He saw the way Amara's eyes lingered longer on him when he slept, and how Oliver stopped shaving, too distracted to care. The hospital staff became more careful with their words, and everyone moved with a little more urgency. Liam stayed strong, but his body showed signs of struggle, more tiredness, more pain, longer naps. Amara and Oliver tried not to let him see their fear, but it was always there. Behind every smile was a silent question. What if time runs out? What if they can't find the donor? Every phone call was filled with hope, and every no match found crushed it a little more. The love surrounding Liam was stronger than ever, but so was the truth they couldn't ignore. Time, once again, had become the enemy. Oliver had reached his limit. He used every connection, every resource, and every dollar he could access to speed up the search for a perfect bone marrow donor for Liam. He called in specialists, asked his staff to focus entirely on the case, and even contacted international agencies. Dozens of people were tested, employees, distant relatives, friends of friends. Some were close matches, but none were 100%. Every day, he opened his email hoping for different news, but it was always the same: no full match found. The doctors reminded him again and again. Only a perfect match would give Liam the real chance he needed. Oliver stopped sleeping again. He spent his nights reading research papers, checking donor databases, and emailing labs in other countries. Every hour felt heavier than the last. Time was slipping away, and even with all the power and influence he had, he still couldn't find what his son needed the most. One afternoon, while watching over Liam with Amara sitting quietly by his side, Oliver received another negative report. He put down the tablet, sighed, and looked helpless. That's when Amara turned to him and said something he didn't expect. "Test me." Oliver looked confused. She explained that she had never been tested and wanted to try, even though the chances were almost zero. He started to speak, to explain how rare it was to find a 100% match in someone who wasn't a close family member. But she cut him off. "I know the chances," she said. "I want to try anyway." Oliver didn't argue. He knew better now than to ignore her instincts. So they arranged for the test. The sample was collected, and everyone agreed not to expect much. Amara returned to caring for Liam like always, as if nothing had changed. But deep down, something in her heart felt different. It wasn't hope exactly, but something close to it. Several days later, the phone rang. Oliver answered. The voice on the other end was from the lab. "We need to speak in person," they said. Within hours, Oliver and Amara were in a private meeting room at the hospital. A doctor and a genetic specialist were already there, looking nervous. Amara sat quietly while Oliver paced. Then the doctor spoke. "We have the results," he began. "And it's surprising. Amara isn't just a match. She's a 100% match." For a second, neither of them reacted. Oliver raised his eyebrows, but Amara just stared. The doctor continued, "That's not all. The compatibility is only possible in one situation. According to the genetic profile, Amara is Liam's biological mother." The room went completely silent. Oliver sat down slowly. Amara blinked several times, stunned. "That's not possible," she whispered. But the doctor shook his head. "It is. We double-checked everything. There's no mistake." Amara looked like she couldn't breathe. The news hit her like a wave. The specialists explained the rest. Years ago, when Amara gave birth, she had been told her baby didn't survive. The hospital where she gave birth had made a terrible mistake. Worse than a mistake, possibly a crime. Her child had not died. He had been taken, possibly sold through an illegal adoption process. Somewhere along the way, he had ended up in the arms of Oliver and his late wife, who'd been told the child was theirs. The records were altered. No one had ever noticed the truth. Amara's baby, the one she had cried for all her life, was Liam, the boy she had raised as a caretaker. The boy who had called her mommy, even when no one told him to. The boy she had fed, bathed, protected, and loved for 7 years. Her son, the one she thought she had lost forever, had been next to her the entire time. It didn't feel real, but it was. Amara covered her mouth and began to cry, not the kind of tears that come from sadness, but the kind that come from something too big to process. Oliver sat beside her, speechless. He looked at her differently now. All this time, she had cared for Liam like her own, and now they knew. It was because he was her own. No one in the room could explain how fate had brought them back together in the same house. No one could undo the years of loss and confusion. But in that moment, none of that mattered. What mattered was that Amara was not just Liam's caretaker or emotional support. She was his mother, his real, biological mother. And now, she was also his donor. She could save his life. That boy who had cried in her arms and asked why he looked different. That boy was hers. She would do anything to protect him, and now she had the chance. Later that day, when Amara walked into Liam's room, everything felt different. She sat next to him, holding his small hand, just like she always did. But now she knew the truth. Her son looked up at her and smiled a little. He didn't know what had changed, but he felt something. Maybe it was the way she held his hand tighter, or the way she looked at him like he was everything. Oliver stood by the door, still trying to understand what had just happened, but he didn't interrupt. Amara leaned down and kissed Liam's forehead, whispering softly, "We found a donor." Liam blinked, confused. "Really?" She nodded. "Yes, sweetheart, it's me." He looked surprised. "You?" She smiled through tears. "Yes, me." Liam didn't fully understand the meaning behind it, but he felt safe. He felt calm, and for the first time in weeks, there was no fear in his eyes, only love, and that was enough for now. The discovery hit like a punch to the chest. When the truth was fully explained, Amara couldn't speak. She sat frozen in the hospital chair, her mind trying to catch up with what the doctors had just confirmed. All these years, she had believed her child had died in childbirth. She had lived through the pain of that moment over and over, crying for a baby she thought was gone forever. And now, suddenly, that baby was not only alive, he was Liam. The boy she had raised, fed, loved and held every single day for the past 7 years. Her body trembled. It felt like her whole world had flipped upside down. Part of her wanted to scream, to demand answers, to go back in time and fix everything. But another part of her, the stronger part, was filled with something else. Relief. Her son had never been taken from her completely. He had always been close. He had never left her side. Oliver was just as shocked, but in a different way. He stood near the window, arms crossed tightly, trying to hold himself together. He didn't know where to put all the emotions flooding through him. Guilt, confusion, anger, they all came rushing in. For years, he had believed Liam was his biological son. He had trusted his wife, Emily, when she told him that their child had survived. But now he learned something else. Emily had gone through a miscarriage quietly, without telling him right away. And later, she had arranged for a baby through private channels, not knowing the truth behind it. She believed it was a legal adoption. She believed they were saving a child. Oliver had never questioned it. He hadn't been involved. He had been working, traveling, focused on his business. Now he saw what that distance had cost. A baby had been stolen from his real mother, and he had unknowingly raised that child as his own. The hospital confirmed the story through a retired nurse who had been present at the time of Liam's birth. The nurse, now in her 60s, admitted that the hospital had made a serious mistake. It had happened quietly and had been buried under false documents. Emily had never known the truth, and neither had Oliver. The nurse broke down in tears as she explained it, saying she had tried to forget it over the years, but never truly could. The paperwork had been manipulated by someone else, and Liam had been given to another family. Now, so many years later, the truth had finally come out. Amara and Oliver sat in silence after hearing everything. Their lives had been changed in one conversation, but they both agreed on one thing immediately. Liam couldn't be told yet. He was too weak, and there were bigger priorities. Right now, his life had to come first. The answers could wait. Saving him could not. The bone marrow donation had already been scheduled. The procedure would happen in just a few days. Doctors had warned them that the process would be delicate, but had also given hope. Amara's perfect match was rare, and it gave Liam a real fighting chance. Amara agreed to go through with the surgery without hesitation, not because she had just learned Liam was her biological son, but because, to her, he had always been. The bond between them had been strong from the beginning. No DNA test had been needed for her to love him the way she did. Oliver, for the first time, stepped out of his own confusion and focused on supporting both of them. He worked with the medical staff, asked the right questions, made sure nothing would go wrong. This wasn't about the past anymore. It was about protecting Liam's future. They were no longer just two people trying to help a child. They were a family, whether they were ready for it or not. Every moment leading up to the procedure felt heavier than the last. Liam didn't know the full story, but he could tell that something had changed. Amara was quieter than usual. Oliver stayed closer to him than ever before. When he asked if everything was okay, Amara would smile and say, "Everything's going to be fine, my love." She sat by his bed every night, telling him stories from when he was younger, stories he had heard before. But they felt different now. Oliver brought him drawings, puzzles, and little dinosaur toys. He stopped bringing his phone into the room. For once, work came second. Liam's health came first. The night before the transplant, they both sat together by Liam's side. He was sleeping peacefully, unaware of the surgery ahead. Amara held his hand tightly while Oliver stood nearby, watching the boy who had unknowingly brought them together. In the silence, they both understood something. Their lives had changed forever. The truth had broken something, but it had also revealed something deeper, something that had always been there, quietly shaping everything. Liam had never been truly alone. The woman he called Mommy really was his mother. The man who once felt like a stranger had become a father in every way that mattered. Fate had kept them connected, even when the world tried to tear them apart. And now, with the transplant ahead, there was hope again. Not just medical hope, but emotional hope. A hope that came from knowing that the bond between them wasn't just built through routines or caregiving. It was real, rooted in something no one could explain. Amara and Oliver looked at Liam and knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. They still didn't have all the answers. They still didn't know how or when to tell him the truth, but for now, they had a chance to save him, and that chance was all that mattered. The surgery was scheduled quickly. There was no more time to waste, and the medical team knew that every hour counted. Amara was admitted to the hospital 2 days before the procedure. She stayed in a quiet room, going through the necessary tests and preparation. Nurses checked her vitals, drew blood, and explained everything step by step. It all felt surreal. She had spent so much time in hospitals caring for Liam that being the patient now felt strange. She had always been the strong one, always on her feet. But now she was the one in the bed, waiting, and for the first time in a long time, she felt fear. Not fear of pain or surgery, but fear that something could go wrong, that she wouldn't be able to help Liam. She stood up and walked to the window. Down in the garden, Liam was playing slowly, holding his stuffed giraffe. He looked up and smiled. In that moment, her fear disappeared. The day of the surgery arrived. Amara was taken to the operating room early in the morning. The staff was gentle, calm, and respectful. They knew the importance of what was about to happen. Oliver stayed with Liam in his room, trying to keep him distracted with drawings and soft music. Liam knew something was happening but didn't understand all the details. He asked once if Amara was okay, and Oliver smiled and told him she was helping in a very big way. The surgery went smoothly. The doctors extracted the bone marrow without any complications. When it was over, Amara was moved to recovery. She was tired and sore, but her first question was about Liam. The nurses told her everything was going according to plan. A few hours later, Liam was taken into the transplant room. The medical team carefully introduced the healthy marrow cells into his bloodstream, watching every monitor, every number. The room was quiet, focused, hopeful. In the days that followed, Liam remained under close observation. The doctors explained that the next few weeks would be critical. His body needed to accept the new cells and begin producing healthy blood on its own. Oliver never left the hospital. He slept in the chair next to Liam's bed, held his hand during tests, and read him stories every night. Amara, still recovering, stayed in the room next door. She visited as often as her body allowed, always with a soft smile and a gentle voice. The nurses kept track of Liam's progress every day, and little by little, the signs began to change. His temperature stayed normal. His appetite returned, slowly. The color began to come back to his cheeks. And then, one morning, the doctor walked in with a clipboard and said the words everyone had been waiting for. "The transplant is working." Liam's body was responding. The cells were growing. For the first time in a long time, there was real, solid hope. As the weeks went by, Liam got stronger. He was still thin and weak, but he started asking to sit up on his own. Then he wanted to stand. With help, he took a few steps across the room. Oliver and Amara clapped and cheered like it was the biggest achievement in the world. For Liam, it was. He began smiling again, not just small smiles, but real ones. He laughed at silly jokes, asked for more bedtime stories, and started building puzzles again. The hospital room, once a place of pain and quiet, now felt alive. The doctors spoke openly about remission. The medical team, who had seen so many hard cases, looked proud and relieved. Amara kept a journal by her bed, writing every small step, every little victory. Oliver brought in photos of Liam's mother and showed them to him, sharing stories for the first time. The healing wasn't just physical, it was emotional too. Their small family was slowly being rebuilt. Oliver changed more than anyone could have imagined. He was no longer the distant, work-focused man who didn't know how to show emotion. He became someone who sat with Liam for hours, helped him walk down the hallway, and asked Amara if she had eaten that day. He no longer cared about meetings or deadlines. His phone stayed off most days. He listened more, talked less, and showed his feelings without shame. Amara noticed the difference. She didn't say much about it, but she saw it in how he looked at Liam, with pride, with fear, with love. They still hadn't told Liam the full truth about who she was, but there was no pressure. There was time now. What mattered most was that Liam was alive and healing. And every time he called her Mommy, Amara held on to that word with her whole heart. It wasn't just affection. It wasn't just habit. That word was truth. It always had been. Amara often thought about how everything had happened. How a child she thought she had lost had come back into her life without her knowing. How he had always been close, always felt like hers, even before the truth came out. She remembered every moment, every bedtime story, every hug, every night spent worrying. It all made sense now. The bond they had wasn't random. It was built from something real, something that couldn't be seen on paper but could be felt in every look and every touch. Liam, without ever knowing the full story, had recognized her. He had called her Mommy long before the test confirmed it. It wasn't a mistake, it wasn't a coincidence. It was destiny, as simple as that. She had found her son, and he had found her. The transplant had given him life, but the love between them had been there all along. Now finally, they had both been given a second chance, and they weren't going to waste it. Months had passed since the transplant. The house that once felt cold and quiet was now filled with movement and laughter. Liam was no longer the weak boy who barely had the energy to speak. He ran through the garden almost every morning, sometimes chasing butterflies, sometimes just running for the sake of it. His hair had started to grow back. It was still short and soft, but it covered his head again. Every week it looked a little thicker. Amara watched him from the porch as he played, her eyes following every step he took with a mix of pride and disbelief. Oliver often joined them outside, sitting on the grass or pushing Liam on the swing. Life had slowly returned, and with it, a new sense of peace. One afternoon, as Liam sat beside Amara under the big tree, he looked up and asked, "Do you think I'll ever be strong like Daddy?" She smiled and answered, "You're already stronger than any grown-up I know." His question seemed so innocent, but she knew it came from somewhere deeper. He had seen a lot for someone his age, more than many adults ever would. That night, after Liam fell asleep, Amara sat in the living room with Oliver. They both knew it was time. The truth had been sitting quietly between them for weeks now, waiting for the right moment. Liam was healthy again, stronger than ever, and more importantly, emotionally ready. They didn't want to carry this secret forever. The decision hadn't come easily. They had gone back and forth, unsure of how to say it, how much to say, and what words would be gentle enough. But they both agreed on one thing. Liam deserved to know the truth. Not as a shock, not as something to break him, but as something to bring him even closer to the people who loved him most. Later that night, they walked into Liam's room together. He was already tucked in, hugging his stuffed giraffe like he always did. The soft nightlight lit the room with a gentle glow. Amara sat on the edge of his bed while Oliver pulled up a chair. Liam looked up at them, curious. "Is something wrong?" he asked. Amara shook her head. "No, sweetie, nothing's wrong," she said softly. "We just want to talk to you about something very special." Liam nodded and waited. They began slowly, telling him about how love doesn't always follow the rules, how sometimes life brings people together in strange and unexpected ways. Then gently, Amara told him about the day he was born, how she had loved him before she even held him, and how life had separated them without warning. Oliver added that when Liam came into their lives, they believed everything had happened normally. But it hadn't. The truth, they said, was that Amara wasn't just his caregiver, she was his real mother. Liam didn't say anything at first. His eyes filled with tears and he looked down at his hands. Oliver waited quietly, giving him space. Amara stayed close, her hand resting gently over his. After a long pause, Liam looked up, his voice shaky. "So, that's why you shaved your hair?" Amara's eyes welled with tears, and she nodded. "Yes," she said. "I didn't want you to feel alone. I didn't know back then, but my heart always knew." Liam leaned forward and wrapped his arms around her. He didn't cry out loud. He didn't ask 100 questions. He just held on to her like he had done so many times before. But this time, he understood why it always felt so right. That hug carried years of lost time, but also the healing of finally being found. Oliver reached out and placed his hand gently on Liam's back, and for the first time, they were all connected not just by love, but by truth. After that night, things felt different, but in the best way. Nothing needed to be forced. Liam didn't change overnight, but he asked more questions as the days went by. He wanted to know what Amara was like before he was born, what his first days in the world had been like, and if she had ever looked for him. Amara answered every question with honesty and care. She told him about the pain of losing him, about the years of wondering, and how fate had brought them together again without either of them knowing. Oliver added his own stories too, about how proud he was to be Liam's father, even if their beginning wasn't what he had believed. Liam began to understand that families aren't always formed in the expected way. Sometimes they're built by love, choice, and a little bit of luck. The past had been filled with confusion and hurt, but the present was finally clear and full of meaning. The truth didn't break them, it brought them closer. Liam started calling Amara Mom with a different tone now, like he fully understood what the word meant. He still called Oliver Dad, and nothing about that had changed either. There was no confusion in his heart, just connection. They went back to their daily routines, but with a deeper bond. Oliver began preparing dinner with Amara more often, and Liam helped set the table, humming quietly as he placed each plate. They shared movie nights on the couch, went for short walks outside, and celebrated every little milestone, from Liam gaining more weight to him being able to climb a few stairs without help. They didn't rush life anymore. They enjoyed it. Every step forward felt like a gift, and every moment together reminded them of what they had nearly lost. The pain of the past was real, but it no longer controlled them. It had been replaced by something stronger, love that knew the whole truth. Liam had been through so much. His body had fought hard, and his spirit had held on through fear, pain, and silence. But now he had something more than treatment. He had peace. That night, after the big talk, as Amara turned off the light and kissed him goodnight, he smiled up at her. "I'm really happy you're my mom," he whispered. She bent down and hugged him tightly. "And I'm really happy you're my son." She didn't cry, not this time. Her heart was full, and her mind was calm. She had found him, and he had found her. And even though the road had been long and unfair, they were where they belonged. Oliver stood in the doorway watching them. He felt no jealousy, no sadness, only gratitude. In that hug, a new chapter had begun. The world hadn't been kind, but love had found its way back. And sometimes justice comes dressed as a quiet, unbreakable love. On Liam's next birthday, everything felt different. The house was full of life, laughter, and the sound of children playing. Colorful balloons decorated the garden. Tables were filled with snacks and juice boxes, and a large cake stood at the center of it all. On the cake, written in bright blue icing, were the words, "Thank you, Mommy." Liam, now healthier and stronger, stood in front of it with a big smile, surrounded by his friends, Amara and Oliver. His hair had grown back enough to curl slightly at the ends. As everyone gathered around, Liam closed his eyes tightly and made a wish. Then he blew out the candles while everyone clapped and cheered. Amara stood beside him, her hand resting gently on his shoulder. Her eyes were watery, but she smiled through it. This wasn't just a birthday. It was a celebration of life, of second chances, and of a journey that no one had expected would turn out this way. The backyard was filled with people who had followed their story. Neighbors, hospital staff, friends from school, even volunteers from the clinic all came to celebrate. Children ran across the grass with toy dinosaurs, bubbles floated through the air, and music played softly from a speaker near the porch. Amara helped serve cake, laughing every time Liam asked for just a little more. She moved through the crowd like someone who finally felt she belonged, because now she did. Not just as Liam's caretaker or as the woman who had raised him, but as his legal mother. The documents had been finalized weeks before. She now shared the Sinclair last name, officially part of the family. The judge who approved it had smiled and said it was the easiest decision she'd made all year. Liam had hugged Amara tight when she showed him the new ID card. "You were always my mom," he had said. "Now it's just on paper too." He tapped the microphone gently and waited for the noise to quiet down. His eyes moved across the crowd until they found Liam and Amara standing together, watching him. He took a deep breath. "Today is a special day," he began. "Not just because we're celebrating Liam, but because we're celebrating something bigger than just a birthday." He paused, visibly emotional. "This year changed everything for us. It tested us, broke us, but it also brought us closer. And today, I want to honor someone who was part of that journey, even though she's no longer with us." Oliver announced the creation of a new foundation in honor of his late wife, Emily. The foundation would help mothers who had been separated from their children due to medical mistakes and broken systems. Families who, like theirs, had suffered without answers. The crowd applauded, many with tears in their eyes. Amara stood quietly while Oliver spoke. She didn't expect him to do that. Honoring Emily in that way showed just how much Oliver had changed. It also reminded her that this story had many layers. Pain, healing, and people who had tried their best, even when things went wrong. She stepped forward once Oliver finished speaking and hugged him tightly, whispering, "Thank you." He nodded. No words needed. It wasn't about the past anymore. It was about what they were building together now. Liam pulled Amara by the hand and asked if they could go play with the other kids. She smiled and followed him. He ran off with a paper airplane, his laughter echoing through the garden. Watching him, Amara felt something settle inside her. This wasn't just a happy moment. It was a full circle. Everything they had gone through, all the pain and confusion, had led them here. It hadn't been fair, but it had become something beautiful. Inside the house, in the living room, a single photograph hung on the wall in a simple wooden frame. It showed Amara months earlier, sitting in the bathroom, shaving her head. Liam stood in front of her, watching with wide eyes. It had been the turning point, the moment when love became visible in the most selfless way. That image became more than just a memory, it became a symbol. Guests walked by it during the party, pausing to look. Some wiped their eyes, others smiled. It told a story without needing words. Not a story about cancer or illness or legal documents, but a story about love. Quiet, stubborn, unshakable love. The kind that doesn't need permission or recognition. The kind that just shows up. For Liam, that moment had never left him. It was when everything started to change. He didn't need to understand genetics or legal terms. He had known deep in his heart who she was. That photo captured it perfectly. The party slowly came to an end as the sun began to set. Families said their goodbyes, children left with gift bags, and the garden began to quiet down. Liam sat on the grass with Amara, resting his head on her arm. Oliver brought over a blanket and placed it over them. They didn't say much. No big speeches or dramatic reflections. Just silence and peace. For the first time in a long time, life felt steady. The story that had started in pain and silence had found its voice. It had passed through loss, truth, and healing, and arrived at joy. Not the loud, perfect kind, but the calm, steady kind that comes from being exactly where you belong. Liam looked up at Amara and whispered, "Best birthday ever." She smiled and kissed his forehead, and in that moment, everything made sense. Sometimes a child doesn't need a superhero with a cape. Sometimes they just need someone who stays, someone who shaves their head, holds their hand, and never lets go. Finally, we've reached the end of this story. I'm extremely happy that you've made it this far. Thank you very much for watching. Comment below what you thought and what was the best or worst part. Don't forget to subscribe. Until next time.